On Valentine's Day, a single, work-obsessed billionaire CEO hosting a company party hires his sister's friend to pose as his date. But the night of the event, what she did changed everything. The morning sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Hunteka's executive office, casting long shadows on the minimalist decor. Alexander Hunt sat at his imposing black marble desk, scrolling through reports with the precision of a man who demanded perfection. The sharp clack of his Mont Blanc pen against the desk echoed through the silent room, a testament to his impatience. Across from him, his PR team shuffled uncomfortably. "Valentine's Day?" Alex arched an eyebrow, his tone as cold as the frost clinging to the windows outside. "Yes, Mr. Hunt," one of the team members stammered. "The gala has been planned for months. It's an opportunity to celebrate Hunteka's achievements and, well, foster goodwill." "And the problem?" Alex leaned back, his piercing blue eyes locking onto the speaker like a hawk sizing up prey. The head of PR, a composed woman named Laura Grant, cleared her throat. "There's been chatter among the board and employees. Some are concerned about your image. Words like unapproachable and work-obsessed have been used." Alex's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "Perception matters," Laura pressed gently. "Your reputation affects everything from employee morale to investor confidence. Attending the gala alone may reinforce the idea that you're disconnected, even cold." "Cold," Alex repeated, the word hanging in the air like an icicle. He wasn't unfamiliar with the label. It was an inevitable consequence of the life he'd chosen. Success demanded sacrifices. And for Alex, personal connections had been the first to go. "Let me get this straight," he said, voice sharp. "You think my absence of a date at a glorified party could destabilize a billion-dollar corporation?" "It's not just the date," Laura replied cautiously. "It's the optics. A partner shows balance, humanity. It makes you relatable." Alex's gaze hardened. "Relatable? I run a company, not a popularity contest." "Be that as it may," Laura said, holding her ground. "The board is watching. They're already concerned about Hunteka's aggressive expansion strategies. This could be an easy way to soften their concerns." Alex leaned forward, fingers steepled, contemplating her words. It was infuriating, but he couldn't dismiss the point entirely. Investors were fickle creatures, swayed as much by emotion as by numbers. If a single evening with a manufactured smile and a temporary date could quiet the noise, perhaps it was worth considering. Still, the idea grated on him. He dismissed the team with a curt nod, signaling he needed no further input. Once the door closed behind them, he ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair, muttering under his breath, "What's got you looking like someone stole your coffee?" The cheerful voice of Olivia Hunt, his younger sister, broke the tense silence. She strolled into the office with her usual breezy confidence, a contrast to Alex's stern demeanor. Dressed in a vibrant red coat and carrying a bouquet of tulips, she placed them on his desk without waiting for an invitation. "Olivia," Alex said dryly. "What do you want? Can't a sister visit her favorite brother?" "I'm your only brother," he retorted, though a hint of a smirk tugged at his lips. "Fine, I heard about the gala." She flopped onto the leather chair across from him. "And the PR fiasco. You really should bring a date, you know." "I don't have time for that nonsense," Alex replied, exasperated. Olivia tilted her head, studying him. "You don't have time for any nonsense. That's the problem." "Not you too," Alex groaned, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Relax, I'm not here to lecture you. I'm here to help." Her mischievous grin set off alarm bells in his mind. "What if I told you I know someone perfect for the job?" "Olivia," Alex warned, but she was already in full swing. "Juliet Montgomery," she announced with dramatic flair, as if revealing the answer to all his problems. "Who?" "My best friend. She owns that adorable flower shop downtown, the Blooming Corner. You'd love her." "I highly doubt that." Olivia ignored him. "She's smart, funny, and exactly the kind of person who could make you look less, well, like a robot." I don't need to look like anything, Alex snapped. This isn't about me. Exactly my point, Olivia said, undeterred. This is about appearances. And Juliet is great with people. She'd charm everyone at the gala and make you seem, human. Alex gave her a pointed look. I'm human. Debatable. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. Why would this? Juliet agree to something so ridiculous? Because she's a good person, Olivia said simply. And because her business could use the exposure. You could offer to sponsor a floral arrangement for the gala as a thank you. That sounds dangerously close to charity, Alex said, though his interest was piqued. It's business, Olivia countered. Think of it as a mutually beneficial arrangement. You get a charming date, she gets a boost for her shop. Everyone wins. Alex was silent for a long moment. The idea was absurd, and yet pragmatic. If Juliet Montgomery could solve his immediate PR issue without complicating his life further, it might be worth considering. Fine, he said at last. Set up a meeting. But make it clear this is a one-time arrangement. Olivia grinned triumphantly. Oh, don't worry. Juliet's not the type to fall for your brooding billionaire act. Alex rolled his eyes but didn't argue. As Olivia left, the office fell quiet again. Alex stared at the tulips she'd left behind, their bright petals a stark contrast to the sleek, impersonal space. For a moment, he wondered what kind of woman owned a shop that created something so vibrant. Shaking off the thought, he returned to his work, already pushing the matter to the back of his mind. Juliet Montgomery was just a means to an end, a temporary solution to a problem he didn't want to deal with. Nothing more. Or so he told himself. The following afternoon, Alex stepped out of his sleek black car, his polished leather shoes clicking against the cobblestone sidewalk. He glanced at the modest storefront before him, its painted sign reading the blooming corner in delicate script. Sunlight glinted off the glass panes, showcasing vibrant arrangements of flowers that seemed almost too cheerful for a man like him. For a moment, he hesitated. The entire idea felt absurd. He was a CEO with thousands of employees under him, a man who thrived in boardrooms and negotiations worth billions. What was he doing at a small flower shop, of all places? Pushing the thought aside, Alex pulled the door open. A faint chime signaled his arrival, and the scent of roses and lavender wrapped around him like an unexpected embrace. The shop was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold efficiency of his own offices. Shelves overflowed with vases, ribbons, and hand-painted signs, giving the space a rustic charm. Behind the counter, a woman was arranging a bouquet of sunflowers, her nimble fingers moving with practiced ease. Her chestnut-brown hair was pulled back in a loose braid, and a smudge of pollen dusted her cheek. She looked up as he entered, her green eyes bright with curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice as warm as the space around her. "I'm looking for Juliet Montgomery," Alex said, his tone clipped but polite. "That would be me." She set the bouquet aside and dusted her hands on her apron. "And you are?" "Alexander Hunt." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but there was no flicker of awe or recognition that he was used to seeing when people heard his name. Instead, she simply tilted her head, as if assessing him. "Ah," she said finally, drawing the syllable out. "Olivia's brother. She mentioned you might stop by." Alex's brow furrowed slightly. Something about her easy demeanor caught him off guard. Most people scrambled to impress him, but Juliet seemed utterly unimpressed. "I wanted to discuss a business proposition," he said, ignoring the faint irritation that came with her indifference. "Your friend mentioned you might be interested." "Business proposition?" Juliet's lips quirked into a half-smile. "This isn't exactly Wall Street, Mr. Hunt. What kind of business could you possibly want with me?" Her tone wasn't hostile, but there was a teasing lilt to it that Alex wasn't accustomed to. He straightened, determined to regain control of the conversation. "My company is hosting a Valentine's Day Gala," he began. "I require a date. Temporarily." Juliet blinked, then let out a small laugh. "You need a date?" So what, you figured you'd buy one from your sister's Rolodex? It's not like that, Alex said, a touch defensively. This is strictly for appearances. My PR team insists it would improve my public image. Of course they do, Juliet said, her smile widening. And Olivia thought I'd be the perfect candidate because she said you were reliable, Alex replied flatly. Juliet folded her arms, leaning against the counter. Reliable. That's flattering. I'll pay you for your time, Alex added, his patience wearing thin. And I'm willing to sponsor a floral arrangement for the gala, which I imagine would be beneficial for your business. At that, Juliet's smile faltered, and a shadow crossed her face. For a brief moment, Alex thought she might actually consider the offer. But then she shook her head. I'm sorry, but no, she said firmly. I'm not interested. Why not? Alex asked, genuinely puzzled. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. Because it's superficial, Juliet said, her tone soft but resolute. I don't believe in pretending for the sake of appearances. And frankly, it sounds exhausting. Alex frowned, unused to rejection. This isn't about belief. It's about pragmatism. Juliet arched an eyebrow. And you think that's going to convince me? It's one night, Alex said, his voice steady. You attend the gala, play the part, and afterward, you never have to see me again. Juliet hesitated, glancing at the bouquet she'd been working on. Her fingers brushed the petals absently, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Alex decided to press further. I understand your shop has been struggling, he said, his tone measured. A partnership with Huntech could give you a significant boost. Think of what that could mean for your business. Her green eyes snapped back to his, sharp and assessing. So, this is charity now? It's an opportunity, Alex corrected. For both of us. Juliet let out a long breath, her gaze shifting to the shop around her. The shelves, while beautifully arranged, were sparsely stocked. The register sat lonely on the counter, a quiet reminder of how slow business had been lately. I don't like being used, she said finally, her voice quieter. This isn't about using anyone, Alex said, surprising even himself with the sincerity in his tone. It's about solving a problem. That's what I do, solve problems. And right now, this benefits both of us. Juliet studied him for a long moment, the silence stretching between them. Finally, she nodded, though there was a hint of reluctance in the gesture. Fine, she said. One night. But I have a few conditions. Name them. No real emotions, she began, ticking off the points on her fingers. No strings attached, and no pretending this is anything other than what it is, a business arrangement. Alex nodded, feeling a flicker of relief. Agreed. And you'd better make good on that sponsorship, Juliet added, her gaze narrowing slightly. You'll have it in writing by tomorrow, Alex promised. She sighed, rubbing her temples. This is ridiculous. Possibly, Alex admitted. But it's efficient. Juliet rolled her eyes but extended her hand. Fine. We have a deal. Alex shook her hand, noting the warmth of her touch and the firmness of her grip. As he left the shop, he couldn't shake the feeling that Juliet Montgomery was far more than he had bargained for. The days leading up to the Valentine's Day Gala passed in a blur of meetings and preparations, though Alex found his thoughts drifting more often than he cared to admit. Every so often, his mind would wander back to Juliet's flower shop, her sharp wit, the way she held her ground, and that look of quiet resolve when she agreed to his proposal. He told himself it was just curiosity. Juliet Montgomery was unlike anyone he'd dealt with before, and that novelty was distracting. Nothing more. When the night of the gala arrived, Alex stood in his penthouse, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored tuxedo. The city lights sparkled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but his focus was elsewhere. Juliet would arrive any minute, and while he didn't doubt her professionalism, he couldn't shake the odd sense of anticipation bubbling in his chest. The intercom buzzed, breaking his thoughts. He pressed the button, his voice calm and steady despite the flicker of curiosity within him. Send her up. A few moments later, the elevator doors slid open, and Juliet stepped out. For a moment, Alex was struck silent. Gone was the practical florist in a dusty apron. In her place stood a vision of understated elegance. Her navy blue gown hugged her figure, the shimmering fabric catching the light with every movement. Her hair was swept into a soft updo, with a few loose strands framing her face, and her makeup was subtle yet striking, highlighting her emerald eyes. Juliet shifted under his gaze, her usual confidence tinged with nerves. "What?" she asked, a hint of self-consciousness in her voice. "Is it too much?" Alex cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "No. It's perfect." She smiled, a little uncertain but grateful for the compliment. "You clean up well yourself." They rode to the gala in silence, the tension between them crackling like static. Juliet glanced out the window, her fingers toying with the delicate bracelet Olivia had lent her. "You've done this sort of thing before, I assume," she said, breaking the quiet. "Plenty of times," Alex replied. "But never quite like this." She arched an eyebrow, her lips twitching into a smile. "Because you're dragging an unwilling florist into the lion's den?" Alex chuckled softly. "Something like that." The car pulled up to the grand entrance of the Huntech building, where the gala was already in full swing. The sounds of music and laughter spilled out into the night, and Juliet's grip tightened slightly on her clutch as they stepped onto the red carpet. Inside, the space was transformed into a dazzling celebration. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, and tables were adorned with elegant floral arrangements, Juliet's handiwork. Guests in tuxedos and ball gowns milled about, champagne glasses in hand, their conversations a low hum beneath the music. Juliet took a deep breath, steadying herself. Alex offered her his arm, and she accepted, her fingers lightly resting on his sleeve. "Ready?" he asked. "Not remotely," she admitted, but the humor in her tone steadied them both. As they moved through the crowd, heads turned, whispers trailing in their wake. Juliet could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but Alex remained poised, his demeanor cool and unshaken. To her surprise, it wasn't nearly as intimidating as she'd feared. Alex introduced her with a quiet confidence, and she quickly discovered that her warmth and natural charm put people at ease. She laughed at jokes, complimented the decor, and even found herself engaged in a spirited discussion about sustainable business practices with one of Alex's board members. Watching her navigate the room, Alex felt an unfamiliar sense of pride. Juliet wasn't just holding her own, she was thriving. He caught himself smiling more than once, her laughter a bright counterpoint to the often stiff atmosphere of these events. "Your date is lovely, Alex," a voice drawled, cutting through the pleasant hum of the evening. Alex turned to see Marcus Lang, his longtime business rival, standing nearby with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. Marcus was the kind of man who thrived on chaos, always looking for an opportunity to stir the pot. "She is," Alex replied evenly, his tone giving nothing away. Marcus's gaze flicked to Juliet. "I must say, I didn't expect you to go for the whole down-to-earth angle. Very clever. Makes you seem almost approachable." Juliet's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And you must be Marcus," she said, her tone cool. "Alex mentioned you might be here." Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard. "Did he now?" "Only in passing," she added with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Alex's lips twitched in amusement, but his patience with Marcus was wearing thin. "Excuse us," he said, steering Juliet away before Marcus could press further. "That was something," Juliet said once they were out of earshot. "Marcus thrives on making others uncomfortable," Alex said, his voice low. "Don't let him get to you." "I won't," she replied, though her expression was thoughtful. The evening wore on, and Alex found himself more at ease than he'd been in years. Juliet's presence had a grounding effect, her laughter and genuine kindness cutting through the often artificial atmosphere of events like this. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of something he couldn't quite name, something more than gratitude for her help. But the fragile harmony of the night was shattered when Juliet overheard a snippet of conversation between Marcus and another guest. Clever PR move, hiring her for the night. Makes him seem almost human. Juliet froze, her chest tightening. The words echoed in her mind, and for a moment she felt like a prop in someone else's game. She turned to look at Alex, who was speaking to a group of investors across the room, completely unaware of the storm brewing in her heart. When Alex finally noticed her absence, he found her near the entrance, her expression guarded. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low. "Was this all just a stunt?" Juliet asked, her voice steady but laced with hurt. "Something to make you look good." Alex's stomach dropped. "Juliet, it's not like that." "Then what is it?" she pressed, her eyes searching his. Alex hesitated, the weight of his words pressing against him. "It started as a necessity," he admitted, his voice soft. "But tonight, you've been more than I could have hoped for. This wasn't just for appearances. Not anymore." Juliet's expression softened, though doubt still lingered. "I need to know that you're being honest with me, Alex. I can't do this if it's just a game." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I'm not playing games, Juliet. Not with you." For a long moment they stood there, the noise of the gala fading into the background. Finally Juliet nodded, though her guard wasn't entirely down. "All right," she said quietly. "But don't make me regret this." "I won't," Alex promised, and for the first time in years, he meant every word. The ride home from the gala was surprisingly quiet. Alex found himself stealing glances at Juliet as the car wound its way through the city. She looked tired but radiant, the soft smile she offered the driver when they pulled to a stop lingering in his mind long after she stepped out and disappeared into her building. That night, as Alex sat in his expansive, nearly empty penthouse, he poured himself a glass of scotch and stared out at the city skyline. He had attended hundreds of events like the gala, each one a calculated move in the chess game of his career. Yet this time, something had been different. Juliet. Her laughter had softened the sharp edges of the night. Her warmth had made the cold, sterile environment feel bearable, even enjoyable. And her genuine kindness had forced him to see parts of himself he'd long since buried. He told himself it was relief, that she'd done her job better than expected, but deep down, he knew it was more. Meanwhile, Juliet lay awake in her small but cozy apartment, staring at the ceiling. The gala had been overwhelming in every way, from the grandeur of the venue to the intensity of the people, but Alex was what lingered most in her mind. She had seen flashes of something deeper in him, moments of vulnerability, of sincerity, that contradicted his reputation. She reminded herself that it didn't matter. Their deal had been straightforward, a business arrangement, nothing more. Yet, as she replayed the way he had looked at her, the softening in his tone when he reassured her, Juliet couldn't stop her heart from stirring. The next morning, Juliet was busy rearranging a delivery of fresh peonies when the chime above her shop door rang. Glancing up, she froze, surprised to see Alex stepping inside. He was dressed more casually than usual, though his tailored coat and polished demeanor still screamed wealth and power. "Alex," she said, brushing her hands on her apron. "I wasn't expecting you. I wanted to follow up about the gala," he said smoothly, his tone professional. "And to thank you? The floral arrangements were a hit." Juliet smiled faintly. "I'm glad to hear that." He looked around the shop, his gaze lingering on the bursts of color and life. "This is a nice space." "Thanks," she said, folding her arms. "So, what can I do for you?" Alex hesitated, as if he wasn't entirely sure himself. "I thought we could discuss future opportunities for collaboration. Huntech could benefit from more events with a personal touch, and your arrangements are exactly the kind of detail we need." Juliet raised an eyebrow. "You want to hire me for more events?" "Possibly," he said, though his tone lacked its usual certainty. "I thought we could talk through some ideas." She tilted her head, studying him. There was something different about him today, less guarded, less precise. Against her better judgment, she nodded. "Okay. Let me get some coffee. Over the next hour, they sat at a small table in the corner of the shop, discussing potential partnerships. But as the conversation wandered, Juliet noticed Alex's interest shifting. He asked about her shop, her work, even her family. The cold businessman from the Gala seemed replaced by someone more curious, more human. And Alex found himself wanting to linger. The cozy warmth of the shop was a stark contrast to his sterile office, and Juliet's candid honesty was refreshing. She didn't tiptoe around him or try to impress him, she simply was. Days turned into weeks, and Alex's visits became more frequent. At first, he framed them as business-related, always coming with some thin excuse about potential partnerships or ideas for corporate events. But it didn't take long for Juliet to catch on. "You don't have to keep pretending this is about work," she said one afternoon, a teasing smile on her lips. Alex paused, caught off guard. For a moment, he considered deflecting, but the sincerity in her eyes made it impossible. "Maybe I just like the coffee." Juliet laughed, the sound light and genuine, and Alex realized he didn't mind being caught. Their bond grew slowly but steadily, built on quiet conversations and shared moments. Juliet began to see more of the man beneath the polished exterior, a man who carried the weight of his success with quiet determination but also loneliness. And Alex found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years, drawn to Juliet's authenticity and warmth. But not everyone was as pleased with the growing connection. Olivia dropped by Juliet's shop one afternoon, her usual bright demeanor tempered by a hint of concern. "You and Alex seem to be spending a lot of time together," she said casually, her tone light but probing. Juliet shrugged, arranging a bouquet. "He's been stopping by. It's mostly business." Olivia gave her a knowing look. "Juliet, I love you, but you're not a business arrangement anymore. I know my brother. He's not the kind of guy who gets involved with people lightly." "I'm not involved," Juliet said firmly. "We're just talking. Talking leads to other things," Olivia said gently. "And I don't want to see you get hurt." Juliet set down the bouquet, sighing. "I know how this looks, but I'm not deluding myself. He's a billionaire CEO, Olivia. I run a flower shop. Our worlds don't overlap. That doesn't mean feelings can't get messy," Olivia warned. "Just be careful, okay?" Juliet nodded, though Olivia's words stuck with her long after she left. That evening, as she closed up the shop, she couldn't shake the unease creeping into her chest. She had tried to keep her distance, to remind herself that Alex's interest in her was temporary, but the lines were blurring. And it scared her. For Alex, the growing closeness wasn't without its own challenges. He was used to controlling every aspect of his life, but with Juliet, control felt impossible. She challenged him, softened him, and made him feel things he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. But with that came vulnerability, a vulnerability he wasn't sure he could afford. As their worlds continued to intertwine, both Alex and Juliet found themselves standing on uncertain ground, drawn to each other yet wary of what it might cost them. Neither of them could predict where the path would lead, but one thing was clear: this was no longer just a deal. It was something far more complicated, and far more dangerous. A few days after Olivia's visit, Juliet was still grappling with her feelings. Her growing bond with Alex had become undeniable, but the fear of what it might lead to, or worse, what it might not, kept her cautious. She threw herself into her work, hoping the comfort of flowers and routine could distract her. But the sound of Alex's deep voice greeting her from the doorway proved otherwise. "Juliet," he said, stepping into the shop. He looked different today, more relaxed. He wasn't wearing one of his sharp suits but a simple sweater and jeans. For once, he seemed like a man, not a CEO. "Alex," she replied, trying to keep her voice neutral despite the warmth that crept into her cheeks. "What brings you here this time? More fake business to discuss?" He smiled faintly, a hint of sheepishness in his expression. "Not today. I thought maybe you could help me with something." Juliet raised an eyebrow. "Help you? I have a garden," he admitted, his tone almost embarrassed. Or, well, what's supposed to be a garden. Right now, it's mostly dirt and weeds. I was wondering if you could take a look. The idea of Alex Hunt, billionaire, asking for help with something so ordinary made Juliet laugh softly. But the vulnerability in his expression made her pause. She could tell this wasn't just about the garden. All right, she said, setting aside the bouquet she'd been working on. Lead the way. The drive to Alex's estate was quiet but not uncomfortable. Juliet watched the cityscape fade into sprawling suburbs, then into the secluded hills where Alex's mansion sat. The house was breathtaking, modern yet imposing, with sleek glass walls and sharp angles. Yet, as Juliet stepped out of the car, her attention was drawn to the neglected patch of earth on one side of the property. "This is your garden?" she asked, tilting her head. "It was my mother's," Alex said quietly. "She loved gardening. After she passed, my father tried to keep it up, but he didn't have the patience for it. Eventually, it just..." He gestured vaguely at the overgrown mess. Juliet's heart softened. She knelt down, running her fingers through the soil. "It's still good," she said after a moment. "It just needs care. Like anything else." Alex stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, looking almost boyish in his uncertainty. "I thought maybe I could try. I don't know why, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately." Juliet glanced up at him. "It's never too late to start," she said softly. They spent the afternoon in the garden, Juliet guiding Alex through the basics of planting and pruning. It was a strange sight, Alex Hunt, who was used to commanding boardrooms, fumbling with a trowel. Yet, as the hours passed, Juliet saw a different side of him, a man who was willing to try, even if it meant getting his hands dirty. At one point, she caught him staring at the small sprout they had just planted, a contemplative look on his face. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated, then said, "I don't think I've ever slowed down like this. It's strange." "Good strange or bad strange?" she teased, brushing a streak of dirt from her cheek. "Good," he said, his voice quieter now. "My mother used to tell me that gardens teach you patience. That nothing worth growing happens overnight." Juliet smiled, her heart aching for him. She was right. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, they sat on the edge of the garden, their hands caked with dirt, and their clothes streaked with mud. It should have felt awkward, but instead it felt right. "Thank you," Alex said suddenly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "For this. For everything." Juliet turned to him, surprised by the rawness in his voice. "You don't have to thank me." "I do," he insisted, his eyes meeting hers. "You've reminded me of something I didn't even realize I'd lost. For years I buried myself in work, thinking it was the only thing that mattered. But being around you, it's made me see things differently." Juliet's breath caught. She wanted to say something, but the intensity in his gaze rendered her speechless. "I'm not good at this," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Opening up. Letting people in. Every time I've tried, it's ended badly. In business, in relationships. I've been betrayed more times than I can count. So I stopped trying. It was easier that way." Her chest tightened. "Alex. But then you came along," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "And suddenly it didn't feel easier anymore. It felt empty." The air between them grew heavy, charged with unspoken words. Juliet searched his face, her own emotions swirling in a storm of hope and fear. Before she could think, Alex leaned closer, his hand brushing against hers. His touch was tentative, as if he were afraid she might pull away. When she didn't, he closed the distance between them, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was both tender and consuming. For a moment, Juliet allowed herself to sink into it, her heart pounding in her chest. The warmth of his touch, the quiet vulnerability in his kiss, made her feel as though the world had melted away. But then reality came crashing back. She pulled away, her breath shaky. "Alex. I can't." His brow furrowed, confusion and hurt flickering across his face. Why? Because it doesn't make sense, she said, her voice trembling. You. And I'm just a florist. This isn't my world, Alex. It's yours. And I don't know if I can trust that this is real. It is real, he said earnestly, his hand reaching for hers. Juliet, Please, she interrupted, standing quickly. I need time. I need to think. Alex stayed seated, watching her retreat to the car. He didn't stop her, though every fiber of his being wanted to. Instead, he sat there, staring at the small sprout they had planted together, wondering if it would grow, or if it would wither, just like everything else he had tried to hold on to. The days following the garden incident were quiet, almost unbearably so. Juliet had thrown herself into her flower shop, working long hours and keeping her hands busy. Yet, no matter how many arrangements she made or how many customers she served, she couldn't stop thinking about Alex. The kiss lingered in her mind, how tender and genuine it had felt, and how easily it had shattered her carefully constructed walls. But the doubt was there too, gnawing at the edges of her thoughts. Could someone like Alex, with his wealth and power, truly see her as more than a fleeting distraction? For Alex, the silence was worse. He wanted to call Juliet, to tell her how much that day in the garden had meant to him. But every time he picked up his phone, he stopped himself, unsure of what to say. Vulnerability was foreign territory for him, and he hated how exposed it made him feel. Instead, he buried himself in work, attending back-to-back meetings and reviewing endless reports. Yet, even in the midst of Hunteka's whirlwind, Juliet's face kept appearing in his mind. Her laugh, her touch, the way she had looked at him when they planted that tiny sprout together. It was maddening. A week later, Juliet was closing up her shop when Olivia walked in, her expression hesitant. "Hey," Olivia said, leaning against the counter. "How are you holding up?" Juliet forced a smile. "I'm fine. Busy as always." Olivia frowned. "You don't look fine. And Alex? Well, he's been acting like a bear with a thorn in his paw." The mention of Alex made Juliet's heart twist, but she shook her head. "It doesn't matter, Olivia. He and I are too different. It would never work." "Did he tell you that?" Olivia asked gently. "No," Juliet admitted. "But I'm not naive. I know how these things go." Olivia hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out her tablet. "I wasn't going to show you this, but I think you need to see it." Juliet's stomach sank as she took the device. On the screen was an article about Hunteka's Valentine's Day Gala. The headline read, "Billionaire Alex Hunt's secret weapon, the charming florist winning hearts and public support." Her chest tightened as she skimmed the article, which described Juliet as a carefully chosen prop in Alex's PR strategy. It painted their time at the gala as a calculated move to humanize his image and deflect criticism. The article even hinted that her presence in his life might still be part of a larger strategy. Juliet handed the tablet back, her hands trembling. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Olivia looked uncomfortable. "The PR team spun the story, yes. But Alex had nothing to do with this. You know how the media works, they twist everything." Juliet shook her head, her mind racing. "Whether he orchestrated it or not, it still feels like I was just a tool. A way to fix his image." Olivia reached out, but Juliet pulled back. "Juliet, don't let this ruin what you two have. He cares about you." "Does he?" Juliet asked, her voice breaking. "Or is that just another part of the plan?" The next morning, Juliet went to Alex's office, her anger and hurt boiling just beneath the surface. She didn't bother with pleasantries, walking past his assistant and straight into his office. Alex looked up from his desk, startled. "Juliet? Is this what I am to you?" she demanded, holding up her phone with the article on the screen. "Some PR move? A way to fix your reputation?" Alex frowned, standing. "Where did you get that?" "Does it matter?" she snapped. "I need to know if this is all I've ever been to you." "It's not," he said firmly. "I didn't approve that article. I didn't even know about it until now. But your PR team did, she pressed. And isn't that exactly what this was supposed to be from the start? A business arrangement? Just a way to make you look good. Alex's jaw tightened, frustration flashing in his eyes. It started that way, yes. But that's not what it is anymore. You know that. Do I? Juliet said, her voice trembling. Because right now, it feels like I'm just another piece in your perfect little puzzle. Alex ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Why are you making this so complicated? You know I care about you. Do you? She asked, tears brimming in her eyes. Because you've never said it. Not once. All I've ever been is convenient for you. Her words struck something in him, something raw and unguarded. But instead of softening, Alex's defenses kicked in, his voice turning cold. Maybe you're right. Maybe this was all a mistake. Juliet recoiled as if he'd slapped her. A mistake, she repeated, her voice hollow. That's not what I meant, Alex said quickly, but the damage was done. Juliet turned on her heel, her heart shattering as she walked out the door. Alex didn't follow, though every fiber of his being screamed at him to. The days that followed were a blur of pain and emptiness. Juliet poured herself into her flower shop, refusing to let herself dwell on what could have been. But every time she saw a navy blue ribbon or a garden magazine, her thoughts betrayed her. Alex, meanwhile, threw himself into his work with a ferocity that even his closest colleagues found alarming. Meetings stretched late into the night, and he barked orders with a sharpness that left no room for argument. Yet, no matter how hard he tried to drown himself in spreadsheets and strategies, Juliet's voice lingered in his mind, haunting him. He had told himself he didn't need her, that he could go back to his orderly, controlled life without her warmth disrupting it. But now, without her, everything felt wrong. His office felt colder, his penthouse emptier, and even the garden, once a source of unexpected solace, seemed lifeless. One evening, as he sat alone in his living room, staring at the untouched glass of scotch on the table, he realized the truth. Juliet hadn't just been a part of his life, she had become the part that made everything else worthwhile. And now, she was gone. The days turned into weeks, but the void left by Juliet didn't lessen. Alex threw himself deeper into work, but even the satisfaction of closing a major deal couldn't fill the emptiness gnawing at him. Every corner of his life felt hollow. The carefully controlled world he built seemed to crumble without Juliet's warmth to light it. One evening, Olivia stormed into Alex's office without knocking, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced with frustration. She crossed her arms and glared at him, standing defiantly in the middle of the room. Whatever this is, she said, gesturing around his office, it needs to stop. You look like you haven't slept in days, your staff is afraid to breathe near you, and oh, I don't know, you lost Juliet. Alex frowned, leaning back in his chair. I don't want to talk about this. Well, too bad, because I do, Olivia snapped. You let your stupid pride and fear ruin something real. Juliet cared about you, Alex. But instead of owning up to how you feel, you pushed her away. I didn't push her away, Alex muttered defensively. She left. She left because she didn't feel like she mattered to you, Olivia said, her voice rising. Do you have any idea how hard it was for her to let her guard down with someone like you? And you threw it all away because you were too scared to admit you love her. The word hung in the air, cutting through Alex's defenses. He opened his mouth to argue but found he had nothing to say. Olivia's words hit too close to the truth. I don't know how to do this, he admitted quietly, his voice unsteady. Relationships, love. I've always been better off without them. Better off? Olivia repeated, softening. Look at yourself, Alex. Does this look like better off to you? You're miserable. And so is she. He stared at his desk, his mind racing. Olivia wasn't wrong. Juliet had brought something into his life he hadn't realized he needed, something he couldn't replicate with work or success. She'd made him feel alive. I don't even know where to start, he said after a long pause. Start by apologizing. Olivia said gently. And not with some half-hearted excuse. Show her how much she means to you. Alex nodded slowly, a plan beginning to form in his mind. That night, Alex stayed up researching. His thoughts kept circling back to Juliet's world, the flowers, the meanings she always seemed to weave into her arrangements. She had once explained to him, in her patient way, how every bloom carried a story, a message. The memory sparked an idea. The next morning, he visited Juliet's favorite florist supply store, earning more than a few surprised looks from the staff. Armed with books on florography and an assortment of flowers, he spent hours crafting the perfect bouquet. Each flower was chosen with intention: white roses for new beginnings, daisies for loyalty, lavender for devotion, and irises for hope. He wrapped it in navy blue ribbon, the same color as the dress she'd worn to the gala. By the time he finished, his normally steady hands were trembling. He wasn't used to putting his heart into something so vulnerable, but for Juliet, he would. When he arrived at the blooming corner, Juliet was restocking shelves. She froze when she saw him, her expression unreadable. "Alex," she said, her voice guarded. "What are you doing here?" He held out the bouquet, his heart pounding. "I needed to see you. And I needed to tell you. I'm sorry." Juliet hesitated, her eyes flicking between him and the bouquet. "For what?" "For not telling you how much you mean to me," he said, his voice raw. "For letting my fear get in the way. For making you feel like you didn't matter." She took the bouquet slowly, her fingers brushing against the ribbon. Her gaze softened as she studied the flowers, recognition dawning on her face. "You chose these on purpose." "I did," he said, stepping closer. "Because you taught me that flowers can say what words sometimes can't. But I'm going to try to say it anyway." He took a deep breath, his nerves threatening to overwhelm him. "I love you, Juliet. I've never felt this way about anyone, and it terrifies me. But losing you terrifies me even more." Juliet's lips parted, but she didn't speak. She looked down at the bouquet again, running her fingers over the petals. "You don't have to say anything right now," Alex added quickly. "I just needed you to know. I needed you to see that I'm trying." Juliet finally met his eyes, her own filled with a mix of emotions, surprise, hope, and lingering doubt. This is a lot," she said softly. "And I don't know if I can just forget everything that's happened." "I'm not asking you to forget," Alex said earnestly. "I'm asking for a chance to prove that this isn't just a gesture. I want to be better for you, for us." Her grip on the bouquet tightened, and for a long moment, the shop was silent. Then, finally, she nodded. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice steady but cautious. "That's all I can promise right now." "That's enough," Alex said, relief washing over him. "Thank you." As he left the shop, Alex felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a start. And for Juliet, the bouquet in her hands spoke volumes, even as her heart wrestled with what to do next. Valentine's Day arrived with an unseasonably warm breeze that hinted at spring. Juliet woke to the familiar hum of her flower shop, the soft rustle of petals, and the faint scent of roses filling the air. But her thoughts weren't on her work. Instead, they lingered on Alex and the bouquet he'd brought her weeks ago. It still sat in her apartment, the blooms carefully dried and preserved, a reminder of his effort and the vulnerability he'd shown. She wasn't sure why she had held on to it. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was the part of her that still couldn't forget the way he had looked at her, his voice raw as he confessed his love. Juliet had been cautious, unwilling to jump back into something that had hurt her so deeply. But she couldn't deny that Alex had changed. He'd been patient, giving her space while quietly letting her know he hadn't given up. That evening, just as she was about to lock up, a courier arrived at the shop with a note. The envelope was simple but elegant, her name written in Alex's unmistakably precise handwriting. She opened it, her breath catching as she read the words. "Meet me at the mansion tonight at 7. There's something I want to show you." Her first instinct was hesitation, but curiosity and a flicker of something warmer pushed her to agree. After closing up the shop, she hurried home to get ready, her heart pounding in her chest. When Juliet arrived at Alex's estate, the sight before her took her breath away. The once neglected garden was transformed into something out of a dream. Twinkling fairy lights draped the hedges, casting a golden glow over the space. Fresh blooms of every color lined the pathways, their fragrance carried on the gentle breeze. In the center of it all stood Alex, dressed in a tailored suit, looking both confident and nervous. Juliet stepped out of her car, her gaze sweeping over the scene before settling on him. "Alex, what is all this?" He walked toward her, his expression soft. "This garden used to be my mother's pride and joy," he said, gesturing around them. "When she passed, I let it fall apart. I thought keeping it alive would hurt too much. But you changed that. You reminded me that some things are worth the effort." Juliet looked at him, her heart swelling at the emotion in his voice. "I wanted to show you that I'm serious," Alex continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know I hurt you, and I know I can't fix everything overnight. But I've spent these past weeks trying to understand what matters. And it's you, Juliet. You've taught me how to see the world differently. To see beauty where I never thought to look." Her throat tightened, and she blinked back tears as he stepped closer. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "Scared of what it means to let someone in, to risk everything I've built for something I can't control. But I'm more scared of losing you. I'm willing to take that risk because being with you feels like the only thing that makes sense." Juliet looked up at him, her heart full to bursting. "Alex," she started, her voice trembling. "I've been scared too. Scared that I'd never be enough for someone like you. But you've shown me that this isn't about our differences. It's about how we make each other better." She took a deep breath, her hands finding his. "I love you too. And I'm willing to take the risk, as long as we take it together." Relief and joy flooded Alex's face, and before she could say another word, he pulled her into his arms, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like the culmination of everything they'd fought for. It was soft and tender, filled with all the emotions they had struggled to express. When they finally pulled apart, Alex smiled down at her, his forehead resting against hers. "I've been waiting to hear you say that." Juliet laughed softly, the sound filled with warmth. "I've been waiting to feel this sure." He led her deeper into the garden, where a small table had been set with dinner under the glow of the lights. They ate, talked, and laughed, the weight of their past struggles melting away in the intimacy of the moment. Alex shared memories of his parents, the way his mother had nurtured the garden, and the dreams he now had for it. Juliet told him about her childhood, her love for flowers, and how the garden reminded her of everything she'd wanted to create in her own life. As the evening wore on, Alex stood and held out his hand. "Dance with me." Juliet hesitated, glancing around. "Here? There's no music." He smiled, his eyes soft. "We don't need music." She let him pull her to her feet, and they swayed together under the fairy lights, the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of crickets providing the only soundtrack. Juliet rested her head on his chest, her arms around his neck, and for the first time in a long time, she felt completely at peace. As they danced, Alex tightened his hold on her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "This feels right," he murmured. Juliet nodded, her eyes closing as she let herself sink into the moment. "It does." When the night finally came to an end, Alex walked her to her car, their hands entwined. He leaned down, his gaze locking with hers. "This is just the beginning, Juliet. I promise to prove to you every day that you made the right choice." Juliet smiled, her heart full. "And I promise to believe in us." As she drove away, the garden lights twinkling in her rearview mirror, Juliet couldn't help but feel that this was, indeed, the start of something extraordinary. Back in the garden, Alex stood among the blooms, his heart lighter than it had been in years. They had both taken a leap of faith, and for the first time, the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt hopeful. Together, they had found something rare, something worth nurturing, just like the flowers they had planted. And with every step forward, they knew they were no longer alone. The days and weeks that followed their Valentine's Day reunion unfolded like a dream. Juliet and Alex quickly found a rhythm that blended their once separate lives. The once neglected garden became their sanctuary, a place where they spent quiet mornings planting flowers and evenings sharing stories under the stars. It was here, surrounded by blooms, that they built their new life together, one rooted in trust, love, and a shared appreciation for the little things. One Saturday morning, Juliet woke to the sound of birds chirping and the faint aroma of coffee wafting through the house. She stretched and smiled, realizing Alex was already up. Slipping out of bed, she followed the scent to the kitchen, where she found him standing at the counter, attempting to arrange flowers in a vase. He looked adorably out of his element, his usually perfect hair slightly tousled and a smear of dirt on his cheek from an earlier trip to the garden. "What are you doing?" Juliet asked, laughing softly as she leaned against the doorframe. Alex turned, holding up the vase with a sheepish grin. "I thought I'd surprise you. Turns out, arranging flowers is harder than it looks." Juliet crossed the room and gently took the vase from his hands, her laughter bubbling up again as she fixed his lopsided creation. "It's sweet, but I think you should stick to running billion-dollar companies." He chuckled, pulling her into his arms. "Fair enough. But I wanted to do something special for you." "You already have," Juliet said, looking up at him. "Every day." Later that afternoon, they walked hand in hand through the bustling local market. Juliet stopped at a vendor selling handmade pottery, holding up a small clay birdhouse painted with bright flowers. "It's perfect for the garden," she said, her eyes sparkling. Alex took it from her, examining it with a thoughtful smile. "Then it's ours." Life together wasn't without its challenges, but they faced them as a team. Alex learned to slow down and find joy in the quiet moments, while Juliet grew more confident in embracing the new world they were building. They celebrated their victories, big and small, like the first bloom of a rose bush they had planted together or Juliet landing a contract to provide flowers for a major event Huntech was hosting. One evening, as they sat on the garden bench watching the sun dip below the horizon, Alex reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Juliet turned to him, her heart skipping a beat. "What's that?" Alex opened it to reveal a delicate ring shaped like a blooming rose, its petals glimmering in the fading light. "It's a promise," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "That I'll love you, cherish you, and grow with you for the rest of our lives." Tears filled Juliet's eyes as she smiled and slipped the ring onto her finger. "You've already kept that promise." They sat there, entwined, as the stars appeared overhead, their future as bright and beautiful as the garden they had nurtured together. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, a love story that had blossomed from the most unexpected of beginnings. And so, what started as a deal blossomed into something far greater, a love story rooted in trust, patience, and the courage to grow together. Alex and Juliet showed us that sometimes, it's the unexpected moments, the risks we take, and the hearts we open that lead us to the most beautiful chapters of our lives. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales that remind us of the power of love, growth, and second chances. And tell us in the comments, what's the most unexpected way love has surprised you? We'd love to hear your stories. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.